In the summer of 1936, vendors sold hot dogs and ice cream outside a Los Angeles courthouse. They were there because a woman was inside. She was 30 years old. She had been making movies since she was 15. She had buried a husband, survived a father who took every dollar she ever earned, and spent the better part of a decade trying to become someone other than the girl her parents had manufactured and sold to Hollywood like a product. She had written things down in a diary. Her ex-husband had found it. And now, the most powerful men in the American film industry, Louis B. Mayer, Jack Warner, Sam Goldwyn, Irving Thalberg, were sitting in a room waiting for her, telling her that if she took this to court, she would lose everything, her career, her reputation, her daughter. She listened to all of them. She stood up. She said, "I shall proceed with my case as my lawyer has advised me." She walked out. Her name was Lucille Vasconcelos Langhanka. The world knew her as Mary Astor. And what happened in that courthouse in Los Angeles in the summer of 1936, what was read aloud, what was fought over, what the press printed and reprinted until it knocked Adolf Hitler off the front pages of American newspapers, was the first major Hollywood sex scandal in history. It was also a story that began not in a courtroom, but in a household in Quincy, Illinois, in 1906, where a German immigrant named Otto Langhanke looked at his infant daughter and decided she was going to make him rich. She wrote in her autobiography, "I became a valuable piece of property to my parents, closely guarded, closely watched. The nun cloistered in a convent is trained in character. For me, there was no goal, except tomorrow's movie job." Lucille Vasconcelos Langhanke was born on May 3, 1906, in Quincy, Illinois. Her father, Otto, was a German immigrant who had arrived in America with ambitions that never quite materialized. He had tried teaching. He had tried business. By the time his daughter was born, he had landed on something that would finally work. He would make his daughter into a star. Her mother, Helen, was of Portuguese and Irish descent, a woman who had met Otto while teaching drama and elocution, and who shared in the project of manufacturing Lucille into something sellable without ever once appearing to question whether any of it was good for the child at the center of it. Otto entered Lucille into beauty contests at 14. He pushed piano lessons, voice lessons, posture training. When she made a mistake at the piano, he would smack her knuckles with a ruler. When she disobeyed, he would hit her. He opened all of her letters. He read every word she wrote or received. He did not allow her to leave the house alone, not even to walk to the mailbox. She had no friends outside the family, no schoolmates she was permitted to keep, no life that had not been approved by Otto first. She was 15 years old when a photographer noticed her walking down a street in Manhattan and arranged for her to be photographed for a film studio. Jesse Lasky, who ran Paramount Pictures, looked at the photographs and offered her a contract on the spot. He also gave her a new name. Lucille Langhanke became Mary Astor. She did not choose the name. She was not consulted about the name. She was 15 years old, and her father signed the contract and received the money, and Mary Astor ceased to be Lucille Langhanke in a way that was never quite reversible. By 1924, she was 18 years old and earning $2,500 a week. Her father gave her $5 of it. The rest went to Otto and Helen, who had moved the family to Hollywood and purchased a mansion called Moorcrest on Temple Hill Drive, a property so grand that it had formerly been the most luxurious residence in the Crotona colony, a utopian spiritual community. They kept 28 servants. They threw parties. They lived lavishly and continuously on their daughter's earnings, while their daughter was given her $5 weekly allowance and not allowed to go to work without her mother riding along in the car. D.W. Griffith, the most powerful director in silent film, screen-tested her and found her incandescent. He then looked at Otto Langhanke and refused to cast her. He told a colleague, "That man is a walking cash register. I'll never be able to develop the daughter into an actress with the father in the room." She was earning the largest salary in the room in every room she entered. She was not allowed to spend it, choose it, direct it, or keep it. She was 18 years old. Something was going to give. He was 40 years old when he asked for her. John Barrymore was, in 1924, the most celebrated actor in the English-speaking world. He was called the Great Profile. He was handsome, brilliant, dissolute, and had spent the better part of 2 decades consuming everything available to him: alcohol, women, fame, with the same operatic appetite he brought to his performances on stage and screen. He requested Mary Astor specifically to co-star in his film Beau Brummel. She was 18, he was 40. Paramount loaned her to Warner Brothers for the picture. Her parents were watchful and suspicious and present on the set every day. Barrymore got her alone anyway. He offered her private acting lessons. The condition was that her parents not be present. She agreed. She was 18 years old and had never in her life made an unsupervised decision about anything. And a 40-year-old man with the most celebrated mind in the American theater was telling her she was interesting and worth teaching, and that was enough. The affair lasted approximately 2 years. They were, by every account from both of them, genuinely in love. Or what passes for love between an 18-year-old girl who has never been permitted to have a private feeling and a 40-year-old man who has never been denied anything. Barrymore told her to leave her parents. He told her repeatedly, urgently, with the increasing desperation of a man watching someone he cared about being slowly consumed by people who were supposed to protect her. He told her that she was the one earning the money, that the power was hers if she would only claim it. She could not claim it. She had been broken from that particular connection, the connection between herself and her own will, since she was old enough to make mistakes at the piano. Barrymore eventually shifted his attentions to another actress, Dolores Costello, whom he would later marry. Mary watched it happen. She did not rage or pursue. She was 20 years old, and she absorbed the loss the way she had been trained to absorb everything. Quietly, inwardly, without visible complaint. She went back to her $5 allowance and her mother in the car. She started drinking. She escaped her parents the way trapped people often do, by running into the arms of someone who appeared to offer a different kind of confinement. Kenneth Hawkes was a film director and producer, the brother of the legendary Howard Hawks. He was steady, educated, a Yale graduate, a veteran of the Army Air Service in the First World War, and deeply in love with Mary Astor in the reliable, unflamboyant way that was the precise opposite of John Barrymore in every measurable quality. They married on February 24, 1928, at Moorcrest, her parents' mansion, built with her money. Kenneth was 30. Mary was 21. She wore a wedding dress and stood in a house she had paid for and could not legally access without her father's permission. There is a detail from Mary Astor's marriage to Kenneth Hawkes that she included in her memoirs with the particular precision of a detail that had never stopped mattering. Within months of the wedding, she had begun an affair. She never named the man, not in court, not in her autobiography, not in the interview she gave across the decades that followed. She said only that the marriage bed with Kenneth had been emotionally adequate but physically uninspiring, and that she had sought elsewhere what she was not finding at home. What she found at home was also this. Within less than 2 years of her marriage, she was pregnant. The child was not Kenneth's. She had an abortion. She returned to the marriage. She told no one. On the morning of January 2, 1930, Kenneth Hawkes drove to a location outside Santa Monica to direct an aerial photography sequence for his film, Such Men Are Dangerous. 2 planes were involved in the shoot. In the course of filming, the planes collided over the Pacific Ocean. Both aircraft went down. Kenneth Hawkes was 31 years old. He had been married for less than 2 years. He was dead before his wife reached him. Mary Astor's first husband was dead. She was 23 years old. She had been unfaithful to him throughout their marriage, had carried another man's child and terminated the pregnancy, and had never told him any of it. She had a nervous breakdown. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She developed what her physicians described as a delayed reaction to grief, a collapse that expressed everything she had been holding since Barrymore and the piano lessons and the $5 allowance and the locked house on Temple Hill Drive. She was referred to a physician. His name was Dr. Franklin Thorpe. He was a gynecologist. He was kind to her during her recovery. He diagnosed her with malnutrition and incipient tuberculosis and prescribed rest, and she got better. And the line between patient and physician dissolved the way it sometimes dissolves when a patient is a 24-year-old actress and a physician is a man who finds her interesting. They married on June 29, 1931. She was 25. He was the second husband. In June 1932, they had a daughter. She was born in Hawaii, where Mary and Franklin had sailed on their yacht. They named her Marilyn Hawoli Thorpe. She had her father's strong frame and her mother's dark eyes, and Mary Astor, who had spent her entire childhood as someone else's property, held her daughter and understood for the first time what it felt like to have something that belonged entirely to her. Thorpe was controlling in the specific, low-temperature way of men who do not raise their voices and do not need to. He managed money. He managed schedules. He managed opinions about what his wife should do and who she should see. He was, by the account of multiple people who observed them, a man whose emotional temperature had been calibrated to exactly 1 degree below what would require anyone to act on it. By the end of 1932, Mary had asked for a divorce. Thorpe refused. In 1933, she traveled to New York on a professional engagement and did not entirely come back. New York in 1933 was a particular kind of freedom for a woman who had never been allowed to have one. She was 27 years old. She was a star. She had money, real money, for the first time, because Kenneth Hawkes had reorganized her financial affairs during their marriage, and her father no longer controlled her earnings. She had an apartment. She had, for the first time since she was 14 years old, an existence that did not require anyone else's permission. She began to write. The diary she kept during this period was written in brown ink that appeared at a distance to take on a purplish hue. The press, when it later glimpsed a page in court, called it the Purple Diary. The name stuck. George S. Kaufman was 43 years old and the most successful playwright on Broadway. He was a founding member of the Algonquin Round Table, the literary circle that gathered at the Algonquin Hotel and contained some of the most formidable minds in American letters. He had written, "You Can't Take It With You," and "Of Mice and Men," and "The Man Who Came to Dinner," and a dozen others. He had won a Pulitzer Prize. He had been married to his wife Beatrice for 20 years, and they had, by mutual agreement, an arrangement that permitted both of them to conduct outside relationships. He was also, by every account of those who knew him, possessed of a sexual appetite that was as celebrated in private circles as his literary appetite was celebrated in public ones. Mary met him through the New York literary world she was discovering. She was immediately attracted to him. He was immediately attracted to her. She wrote about it. She wrote, "I am still in a haze, a nice, rosy glow. It's beautiful, glorious, and I hope it's my last love. I can't top it with anything, in my experience." She wrote about afternoons in Manhattan and evenings in Palm Springs, where Kaufman was working on a play, and Mary was not, for the first time in a decade, required to be anywhere else. She was writing the truth of her own life, in her own words, in her own book. She was 37 years old in ways that mattered, and 27 in years. And she was writing as honestly as she knew how about the first thing that had felt like a genuine choice. She left the diary in a bedroom drawer when she returned to California. Her husband found it. Franklin Thorpe read the diary. He read it carefully. He read it by the later account of his daughter Marilyn more than once. Then he made his demands. He wanted sole custody of Marilyn. He wanted half the proceeds from the sale of their family home. He wanted control of Mary's finances. And if she did not agree to every one of these terms, he would release the diary to the press. The diary would, his attorney would later announce in open court, split the movie industry wide open, because beyond the entries about Kaufman, it reportedly contained assessments of the intimate performance of almost every well-known actor in Hollywood. Whether this characterization was accurate, or whether it was the specific exaggeration of a lawyer trying to maximize the value of his client's weapon, has never been definitively resolved. The diary itself no longer exists. What is documented is this: Mary Astor, under prolonged pressure and suffering from influenza during the period of negotiation, signed a divorce settlement she would later describe as extorted. She gave Thorpe legal custody of Marilyn. She signed. She recovered from her flu. She read what she had signed. She hired a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Roland Rich Woolley. He read the settlement. He read the diary. He told Mary Astor that she had been coerced, that the settlement could be challenged, and that if she was willing to fight, she could win. She had walked out of Barrymore. She had buried Kenneth Hawkes. She had sat across from Franklin Thorpe while he described the weapon he was going to use against her. She had signed things she should not have signed and said nothing when she should have spoken. She was ready to fight. The trial began on July 29, 1936. It ran for 16 days. Vendors sold hot dogs and ice cream on the courthouse steps. The crowds that gathered each morning were by the accounts of journalists who covered the proceedings, comparable to the crowds at major sporting events. People brought lunches. People brought children. Seats inside the courtroom were allocated by lottery on the days when the most damaging testimony was expected. On the day Thorpe's attorney, Joseph Anderson, announced that the diary would be entered into evidence, that it would prove in Mary Astor's own handwriting that she had willfully abandoned her daughter for a married man named George Kaufman, the story moved from the entertainment pages to the front pages of every newspaper in America. It knocked reports of Adolf Hitler off the front pages of the New York Daily News and the New York Daily Mirror. George S. Kaufman, served with a subpoena to testify, did not appear in court. Irving Thalberg, the most powerful producer at MGM and Kaufman's current employer, put the playwright aboard his private yacht and sailed him to Catalina Island and told the court that Kaufman had disappeared. The judge, Goldwyn J. Knight, who would later become governor of California, issued a bench warrant for Kaufman's arrest. Kaufman was smuggled back to the mainland, hidden inside a large laundry basket, transported by laundry truck to the San Bernardino Railroad station, and put aboard a train to New York. He spent the entire journey in his sleeping berth without emerging. When he arrived in New York and reporters asked how the trip had been, he said, "That is the best way to travel." The bench warrant remained outstanding. Meanwhile, in Sam Goldwyn's office at MGM, on the last day of filming Dodsworth, a film she was making simultaneously with the court appearances, working from 8 in the morning at the studio and then appearing before the judge each evening, every major studio head in Hollywood sat waiting for her. Louis B. Mayer was there. Jack Warner was there. Sam Goldwyn was there. Irving Thalberg was there. Jesse Lasky was there. They told her, through their assembled lawyers, that she was making a mistake, that the diary would destroy her, that the industry had survived the Fatty Arbuckle scandal and the Hays Code and a dozen other catastrophes, and that what she was doing in that courtroom was going to bring everything down on top of everyone. They told her to settle. She stood up from her chair. She said, "I shall proceed with my case as my lawyer has advised me." She walked out of the office. She went back to set. She finished the scene. She went to court. Judge Knight examined the diary in his chambers. He found that several pages were missing. It was, in his ruling, a mutilated document, and therefore not admissible as evidence. The contents that had already been leaked to the press, the entries about Kaufman, the rosy glow entries, the fragments that had been read aloud in the corridors and whispered between reporters and reprinted in newspapers from New York to London, those could not be unprinted. But the diary itself would not be form. Ally entered into the record. On August 13, 1936, Judge Knight issued his ruling. He rebuked both parties from the bench. He rebuked the press. He rebuked what the case had become, a public circus built around the private writings of a woman who had done nothing more criminal than record her own life. He awarded Mary Astor custody of her daughter for 9 months of each year. Thorpe would have Marilyn for 3 months of summer school vacation. The earlier property settlement was annulled. Mary Astor had won. With Mary Astor's permission, the diary was incinerated. The exact contents, the full record of what she had written across those years, the names she may or may not have included, the assessments she may or may not have made, went up in smoke in a courthouse incinerator in Los Angeles in the summer of 1936 and have never been recovered. What she wrote about George Kaufman is known only through the fragments that were leaked. Everything else is gone. Kaufman eventually returned to Los Angeles. He paid a $500 fine to Judge Knight. They shook hands. The bench warrant was dismissed. He never publicly discussed Mary Astor again. The studio executives who had tried to silence her were wrong about everything except one thing. They were right that the scandal would define her. They were wrong that it would destroy her. Mary Astor returned to work. The audiences who had followed the trial, who had stood outside the courthouse eating hot dogs and waiting for the next day's testimony, followed her back into the cinema. She was, if anything, more interesting to them now. She was the woman who had stood up to the most powerful men in Hollywood and walked out of the room. In 1941, 5 years after the trial, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for her performance in The Great Lie, playing a selfish, lying concert pianist who manipulates everyone around her. The same year, she appeared in The Maltese Falcon, directed by John Huston, opposite Humphrey Bogart. She played Bridget O'Shaughnessy, a beautiful woman who lies to every person she meets, who uses intimacy as a weapon, who is the most untrustworthy person in a story populated entirely by untrustworthy people. She would later say she would have preferred to win the Oscar for The Maltese Falcon. There is a particular irony in the fact that the two roles that defined the peak of Mary Astor's career, the roles that demonstrated the full depth of what she could do as an actress, were both women whose most visible quality was deception, a woman who lies about love, a woman who uses intimacy to survive. She knew something about both. The years after the Oscar were not kind in the long arc of them. She married twice more. Neither marriage lasted. She drank. She told the truth about the drinking in her autobiography, the same way she had told the truth in her diary, and with the same result. The truth made her more interesting to the people who read it and did not protect her from the consequences of living it. In 1951, she was found, but unconscious after an overdose of sleeping tablets. Whether it was an accident or a deliberate attempt, she declined to say definitively for the rest of her life. She converted to Catholicism. A priest encouraged her to write about her life as part of her recovery. In 1959, she published her autobiography, My Story, which became a bestseller. She published a second memoir in 1971 and 5 novels across the decade in between. The girl who had been denied the right to send her own letters grew into a woman who turned her entire life into literature. By the 1960s, the roles had diminished to what roles always diminish to for women of a certain age in Hollywood: small parts, television, the occasional supporting turn in someone else's film. Her final screen appearance was in 1964, in Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, in which she played, with a precise and devastating self-awareness, a murderous wife. After that, there was nothing. She spent her final years at the Motion Picture Country home in Woodland Hills, the retirement facility maintained by the industry that had made her a star at 15, taken her money through her father, tried to silence her in a courtroom when she was 30, awarded her an Oscar when she was 35, and eventually stopped calling. She died there on September 25, 1987. She was 81 years old. The cause was heart failure. Her daughter Marilyn survived her. There is a version of Mary Astor's story that reduces her to the scandal. The diary, the affair, the courtroom, the hot dogs and ice cream on the courthouse steps. That version is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. The fuller version begins with Otto Langhanke, a man who looked at his infant daughter and decided she would make him rich, and who succeeded so thoroughly that his daughter would spend the first 26 years of her life as someone else's property. It includes John Barrymore, who saw something genuine in her and failed to protect it. It includes Kenneth Hawkes, who died not knowing that the woman he loved had been carrying someone else's child within a year of their wedding. It includes Franklin Thorpe, who took a diary from a bedroom drawer and turned it into a weapon, and who then watched the woman he was trying to destroy stand up in front of every man in Hollywood who had the power to end her career and say no. It includes the diary itself, brown ink that looked purple, private words written in private, burned in a courthouse incinerator in 1936, and everything that was in it that nobody alive today will ever know. And it includes the final irony, which is this: Franklin Thorpe, the man who used a diary full of his wife's truths as a weapon against her, had his own secrets exposed in the same courtroom. Had been married before Mary. He had not told her. He had conducted 4 affairs during their marriage. His mistress, a showgirl named Norma Taylor, had appeared at his house one night drunk, smashed a window with a candlestick, and chased him through the rooms of the house with a large fork. His own daughter, Marilyn, remembered watching this. The man who had told the world that Mary Astor was an unfit mother, who had threatened to destroy her with her own private words, who had sat across from her and made his demands while she had a fever of 102. That man's affairs, his previous marriage, his house guest with the fork, were all on the public record by the time the judge ruled. The diary was burned. Mary Astor kept her daughter. And 46 years later, in 1987, she died in a retirement home, surrounded by people who had worked in the same industry she had entered at 15. When her father signed a contract and a man named Jesse Lasky gave her a new name and told her who she was going to be. She had spent a lifetime fighting to be someone else. The diary that no longer exists was the most honest record of who that someone else actually was. If Mary Astor's story stayed with you, subscribe to Silk and Sorrow. These are the women whose private lives the public was never meant to see, and whose private lives turned out to be the most interesting part. Next week, the story of a woman who was married to the world's most celebrated composer, and who spent his entire marriage conducting affairs with artists, architects, and poets, while her husband demanded she stop composing music of her own. She outlived 4 husbands. She buried 2 children. She ended her life in New York surrounded by the most famous artists of the 20th century, none of whom she had been faithful to. Her name was Alma Mahler. The secret life behind one of history's most extraordinary marriages is next.